The member for Goldstein.
Thank you, Speaker. I rise this evening to support the motion moved in the Federation Chamber earlier today, that this parliament notes one of the first major international humanitarian effort by this great nation for the survivors of the Armenian Genocide, as well as supporting the relief organisations and committees that came to the people in aid of the people who are the victims of the genocide, including the establishment of orphanages and the support financially for orphanages, as well as, of course, of the other victims of the genocide, including Christian minorities, including the Greeks and Assyrians. And every Australian, every Victorian, every person of good spirit and character who was part of that relief effort to support people in dire need. And as the only member of this House, this place with Armenian heritage, I particularly welcome this motion moved by the member for North Sydney. I also welcome the contributions in a bipartisan way from the members for Bennelong and Hunter, particularly who acknowledged the full extent of the genocide that occurred. There were other speakers to the motion, and I don't want to dispute their motivations or intent. We welcome their empathy. But we also must acknowledge that a word was missing from their remarks. They rightly spoke of a humanitarian tragedy befalling the Armenian people. And they are right, there was a human tragedy. Another spoke of the need for Armenians to be rescued, but didn't perfectly articulate or properly articulate from what. They spoke of events 100 years ago befalling the Armenian people, the loss of life, the marches through the desert, and the need for relief funds to support people in dire and desperate need, but did not dare to speak the tragedy's name: genocide. This motion acknowledges the Australian humanitarian effort to support the Armenian people who suffered from a genocide at the hands of the Ottoman Empire. And I respect everybody who has made a contribution to this motion earlier today. But for the victims, their families and their successors, the healing journey can only begin by acknowledging the depth of the wound. Earlier this year in the Federation Chamber, I remarked on this genocide and its impact and the Australian humanitarian relief. The marching of Armenians to their death started a mobilisation of Australians for their lives. And it's been outlined extensively in the book Armenia, Australia and the Great War by Viken Buchanan and Peter Stanley, who wrote, "In its drive to awaken public consciousness, the Armenian Relief Committee of Victoria prepared a number of pamphlets containing visual and literary images of Armenian suffering and innocence. One of them, titled An SOS from Beyond Gallipoli, included an excerpt from a telegram sent by Dr. Mabel Elliott from Yerevan in late November 1921. She described how all day long you could hear the groans and wails of little children outside our office building, and when the sun shone they were quiet, she said, but in the rain the wails began again. One day, she wrote, the rain turned to snow, and it was awful to listen to them. Elliott shared the terrible dilemma familiar to aid workers who know that all they can give is still too little to solve the problem." Another pamphlet titled Stricken Armenians Appeal to Australians for Help included a graphic photograph of emancipated Armenian refugees, and the caption read, "The frightened half-clothed little creatures live upon grass and herbs and hide like little rabbits in holes on the hillside." The pamphlet asked, "How can you help the stricken Armenians?" and then suggested a £10 feeds clothes and educates a child for a year. The stories of the Armenians being marched into the Syrian desert, of humanitarian and cultural genocide, slowly, of course, drifted back to Australians from our Anzacs. And by 1917, the Age newspaper was reporting extensively as the martyr nation of Christendom, saying, think of the fact that 600,000 of these virile people were rounded up as stock is rounded up and done to death. It was not just a genocide of lives, it was also a cultural genocide, designed to remove the memory of Armenians and their cultural and religious traditions. And that's why I support the motion in the Federation Chamber today, because we honour the memory of Armenians and those who rallied to their support.